Steve knew Singapore so well because he had visited the city several times. Alice understood the movie because she had read the book. He had finished his homework before he went to play football. If we had gone by taxi instead of a bus, we wouldn't have been late. If John had studied harder, he would have passed the exam. Mary said she had already seen this film. Alice asked if I had read Harry Potter. I wish I had saved more money when I was young. He wished he had traveled when he was young. He had gone home before I came. She had cooked food before the kids came. We had not heard this news till yesterday. If only I had taken more food. I'm hungry now. My wife had already cooked dinner when I reached home yesterday. He had broken his leg last week. When they got home yesterday, she had already cleaned the house. I had not sold my property before 2015. They had agreed on the agenda before the meeting ended. She had accepted my invitation. Alan had learned French until the last month. He had toured Rome before the end of the holiday. The patient had taken medicine before the doctor came. I asked her what places she had visited in Europe. We had left the town before the sun rose. The bus had stopped before we stepped out. People had not seen such a strange animal before. The washerman had pressed the clothes before the customer came. She had already sung a song. My son had already gone to school before I came home. The police had dispersed the mob. My friend had posted a letter of congratulation before I met him. I had never been to an opera before last night. All the candidates had entered the examination hall before the exam began. The boss had already turned down my request. I had never seen such a beautiful town before I came here. I had left the park before noon. The plane had taken off before the passengers arrived at the airport. He had already finished the work by last night. She had already eaten dinner by the time I arrived home. They had finished their homework before going out to play. Bob had not painted the window before the rain started. By the time the movie started, I had already bought popcorn. He had forgotten his keys, so he couldn't get into the house. She had missed the bus, so she had to walk to school. By the time we reached the airport, the flight had already departed. They had read the book before watching the movie adaptation. Judd had not learned the lesson until yesterday. He had already left for work when I woke up this morning. She had finished her presentation before the meeting began. By the time they reached the restaurant, it had already closed. I had never seen such a beautiful sunset before I visited the beach. He had never tasted sushi until he went to Japan. By the time the guests arrived, she had already prepared the dinner. They had lived in the city for 5 years before moving to the countryside. She had bought the tickets before realizing the concert was cancelled. By the time we found the lost dog, it had already been adopted. He had studied Spanish for years before moving to a Spanish-speaking country. She had never traveled abroad until last summer. By the time they finished their meal, the restaurant had run out of dessert. I had already taken a shower before remembering I needed to wash my hair. She had never been to Europe until her honeymoon. By the time we arrived at the party, everyone had already left. He had saved up enough money to buy a car before graduating from college. Tom had not been to Paris before the last summer. They had watched all the episodes of the TV series before the new season aired. She had applied for the job before realizing she lacked the necessary qualifications. By the time I reached the bus stop, the bus had already departed. You had not informed me of the decision until today. He had finished the project before the deadline, but it still wasn't accepted. She had already booked the hotel before finding out about the travel restrictions. By the time they returned the library books, they had already been overdue. He had never broken a bone until he fell off his bike. She had finished her degree before deciding to pursue a different career path. By the time they arrived at the museum, it had already closed for the day. He had cooked dinner before his guests arrived, but it didn't turn out well. She had never tasted durian before visiting Southeast Asia. By the time we realized we were lost, it had already gotten dark. They had cleaned the house before their parents came to visit, but it wasn't enough. She had already mailed the package before realizing she forgot to include a card. The match had not finished when I switched on the TV. By the time they reached the summit, they had already run out of water. He had never seen snow until he moved to a colder climate. She had finished her chores before her parents got home, but they still weren't satisfied. By the time I got to the store, they had already sold out of the item I wanted. They had already decided on a vacation destination before I joined the discussion. She had never ridden a horse until her trip to the countryside. By the time they finished the hike, it had already started raining. He had studied hard for the exam, but he still failed. She had already made plans for the weekend before I asked her out. By the time they realized they were lost, they had already wandered deep into the forest. They had saved up for months to buy the new gaming console, but it was sold out. They had not come to any conclusion before the meeting ended. She had never tasted spicy food until her trip to Thailand. By the time they finished renovating the house, they had already exceeded their budget. He had practiced the piano for years before giving up on his musical dreams. She had already ordered food before I arrived at the restaurant. By the time they reached the airport, their flight had already departed. They had been dating for years before deciding to get married. She had never been late to a meeting until her car broke down. By the time they realized they had forgotten the tickets, they had already left home. He had already signed the contract before reading the fine print. I had not reached my destination before the storm came. She had never tried bungee jumping until her trip to New Zealand. By the time they finished the meal, the restaurant had already closed for the night. They had prepared for the interview, but they still weren't offered the job. She had already packed her bags before realizing her passport was expired. By the time they reached the theater, the movie had already started. He had practiced martial arts for years before entering his first competition. She had never seen a live concert until she attended the music festival. By the time they finished the crossword puzzle, it had already been published.